It is the voice of Indiana County, WCCS 101.1 FM and AM 1160, and our conversation with Jim Hock, the author of Father on the Line, is brought to us by Marcus & Mack, a law firm representing injured people. We had Jim on the air a couple of years ago when he wrote about his dad, who was an offensive lineman for the Los Angeles Rams all the way back in the 1950s, in the glory years of Rams football. And Jim, you're back. The book is called Father on the Line. You talk more about your dad and tell some great, great stories. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Oh, I'm happy to have you. I recall telling you, as I said a couple of moments ago, that when we did our first interview 4 years ago, it turns out, you said, or I told you, Jim, you've got enough here to do another book, and you went out and you did it.
Thanks. Yeah, no, it's a labor of love. We all will either unfortunately lose a parent or have a parent that gets sick, and at some point lose a parent. And for me, this was a labor of love of talking to my dad's friends, contemporaries, teammates after my dad had passed away from cancer. And so, it was a great honor to do it and talk about a team and obviously a father and mom that I loved desperately, and a team and a city in LA at the time that was just exploding with just so many different things, and the Rams were a part of that.
You really do, though, in this book called Father on the Line, talk about that father-son relationship. Your dad was really special to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all of our parents are, right, in one way or the other. And my dad was the humble, offensive lineman, the quiet, tough guy who just really, really loved his family, loved his friends, loved the game of football. And, part of the thing, what I tried to do in the book, both books, is, make people realize that there's the humble people, the workhorses, if you will, that make any organization run, whether it's a football team or a radio station or a school or a government, if you will. And it's, the offensive linemen in football that do just that. And so I tried to have my dad as part of, who wasn't, a big star. He was a guy who made the Pro Bowl his second to last year and then blew out his knee and his career was cut short. But he was surrounded by people, a bevy of Hall of Famers on a team of Hall of Famers, and that's what it takes to be successful, right? It's the people behind the scenes that are really doing kind of the grunt work to make the stars, what they are.
One of the things about that Rams team, and we've read about it down through the years, here's a football team. It's quarterbacks, and I use that plural, Norm Van Brocklin and Bob Waterfield. You talk about star power, and I can just imagine your dad coming home and talking about those two guys and how different they were in terms of their personalities, in terms of their talents, and gosh, that would have been a hard decision to make. Who am I putting in this week, Van Brocklin or Waterfield?
Exactly, and they were coached by another Hall of Famer, Sid Gilman, who was kind of known as the architect of the modern passing game in many ways, but you're right. Norm Van Brocklin and Bob Waterfield couldn't have been any different in terms of personalities. Again, both Hall of Famers. Bob Waterfield was a quiet, introverted guy, married to an actress, Jane Russell, the famous crusher heart bra woman from Playtex later in the 70s and early 80s when I was a kid, and just a tremendous athlete. Norm Van Brocklin was a little bit taller and just fiery, and my dad would just tell really funny stories about Van Brocklin kind of screaming at players across the line before he even, made the snap count, and just in a positive way. He was a hyper competitor. Art Donovan, the NFL Hall of Famer, famous defensive lineman for the Baltimore Colts, was also a friend of my father's, and he participated in some interviews for my book. And he had told a funny story that half the time he and Van Brocklin were just screaming at each other and throwing, expletives back and forth before the ball was snapped. And he said they just loved to jaw each other during the game, and then after the game, they would grab a can of Schlitz together.
There you go. Schlitz. Man, you're going back in time.
In time, Schlitz beer.
That's what the book is all about. Your dad was actually born in Pittsburgh, wasn't he?
He was. He was born in Pittsburgh. My grandparents were Irish Catholics who were in Pittsburgh and, came originally from Ireland, their ancestors, settled in Pittsburgh. And then, during the Depression, it was just so many cities were hammered. My grandfather was in the steel business, and unfortunately that was, hammered economically. And so they decided to move to California, where they had some family that moved out to, and that might as well in that timing in the mid 1930s must have felt like across the world. And we have this really funny picture in our family of my dad and his older sister and my grandmother. On the back of it looks like a Model T Ford, and my dad's older cousin was driving them across the country because my grandfather had left a month before and said, "Hey, son, I'll see you in California." And my dad was like, "Where is that?" I had no idea. So they moved to L.A. when my dad was 9.
We think of the L.A. Rams of the 1950s, all that star power, Crazy Legs Hirsch and Night Train Lane and all of those guys. There are so many different dynamics to the book. You're playing in the Los Angeles Coliseum. 90,000 people can show up at one of those games. You've got the Rams, they're the only game in town, but here come the Dodgers in the late 1950s, and they have to deal with that. And there are so many great issues and items having to do with those teams. But really, your book is about a father and son. And here's John Hock going to training camp and playing on a field that's basically, like a hard scrabble field, and he's coming home all beat up, and he's got a beautiful wife who just loves him so much, and it's really a family story.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's a great question you just asked, and again, I tried to honor my dad and my mom and their relationship in this book. As part of a set of characters and a team that was just part of a sport that was growing. And the football in the 1950s was not what it is today. Just to give you an example, Sports Illustrated, the national sports publication that we all know and love, then would have about 10 or 12 pages on Major League Baseball every week. Pro football was lucky to get a page. College football had multi-pages, and it was growing. It was a sport that was expanding rapidly. The general manager of the Rams at the time was a guy by the name of Pete Rozelle, who took a lot of experimentation and innovation in the 1950s with the Rams, marketing first, local television contract, a lot of giveaways to kids to get their parents in the seats. He took a lot of those lessons and became the commissioner of the NFL in 1960, as we know, known as the boy commissioner, because he was only 33 years old, but took a lot of those lessons, crafted a major national television contract for a sport that is built for television. So the 50s were really that kind of building block stage for the league, and Rozelle was such a dynamic, innovative guy that he took those lessons and obviously helped make the league what it was today.
Your dad and you came along pretty much when the career is over and your dad is adjusting to, I want to call it civilian life. You can go ahead and call it that. But then he begins to have to really deal with some devastating health issues, a lot of them having to do with his time playing football. Talk about your dad in his declining years and how your relationship with him grew.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, football is a collision sport, right? It's a sport that just can be so tremendously, it's amazing in a lot of ways, but on the body, it can just have a tremendous negative impact. And my dad's career, as I said earlier, was cut short by a massive knee injury. Operations in the 1950s were not what they were today, so he cut short his growing up. And I never saw him play. I saw him on a lot of film and different specials and stuff like that, but I had never seen him play directly. But his body was just completely blown up, if you will. Both knees were kind of balloons. His shoulders were a mess. And remember, padding back in the 1950s was just basically some cloth and a plastic helmet that was not very good. So, later in life, my dad passed away when he was 72. We have a discussion in our family. If he had lived longer, what would that have been in terms of would he had some of the brain issues or CTE, what have you. Some of the great players that I interviewed for my book and friends of my dad had some of those issues as well, and I kind of picked that up while I was talking to them before CTE was a thing. When I started this book in 2002, it was Alzheimer's was a theme for a number of the players, which was later obviously determined to be CTE.
The book is Father on the Line. Jim Hock is with us this morning talking about his dad, John Hock, and all of the great stories that you and your dad could share. What were some of the great lessons in life that you still carry with you now that you learned from your dad?
Well, it's funny. I have two teenage boys, 18 and 15, one named John after my father, and the other one's William. And I tell them all the time a saying that my dad always said is, do the right thing even when no one's watching. And we try to kind of instill those values, and that was my dad. Just kind of do the quiet work, work hard, kind of give back, be focused on your family and the priorities. He was very, a very spiritual person too. So he went to a Jesuit university in Santa Clara University, and so he was very influenced by the Jesuits. And so like that aspect of service and giving back to others was just a thing that I learned as a kid, and my siblings learned. I'm the youngest of 7.
There's not a lot of money in pro football in the 1950s, especially if you're an offensive guard. And so when your dad retires from football, he has to find a way to make a living and to put food on the table for the family. You talk about that as well in the book. It's just a tremendously heartwarming book. Maybe we don't expect a story about a football guy back in the 1950s to turn out that way, but it's just a beautiful read. It's called Father on the Line. Jim Hock has been with us this morning. Jim, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much. It was an honor.
I appreciate it. Have a great day today.
You too. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.